Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal with Aaron Mate, as always. And yeah, we're live here on YouTube and on Twitter. We're hoping to get live on Rockfin soon. And here we go. And yeah, there's so much to talk about today. There's so much that happened in the past week that I hope we'll have time to get it all in. Obviously, I think we have to talk about the Trump assassination attempt first. Well, maybe it's not obvious, but it feeds into the convention and Trump's hour-and-a-half convention speech last night. Aaron, just like initial thoughts off the bat about the assassination attempt on Trump. Do you believe the official story, and what do you think fed into this really momentous and historically pivotal event?
Well, in terms of believing the official story, I know many people are rightly skeptical. And given that Trump has been targeted by intelligence agencies before, he was, after all, framed as a Russian asset and has been the target of all sorts of false leaks and false claims that have been used to undermine him and keep him in line. I understand why people are skeptical of the claim that this was just a lone shooter, but I've seen no evidence to suggest otherwise. What I think this was is just typical government incompetence. I do think that if this were Biden, I don't think we would have seen this level of screw up. I do think because it's a former president, maybe a former president who elements of the government don't like, things were a bit less strict. Things were a bit less, people, were working a bit less diligently than they would have been were they protecting the active president. But in terms of a conspiracy, I just, again, that's my initial reaction. I don't see any evidence to support it. And I do just think that these government institutions are inept. They're incompetent. They don't work properly. For all this talk about how the U.S. is the most advanced country in the world, the ruler of the world, I mean, this underscores to me just that when you're such a hegemon, you get lazy and you don't work properly. And there's countless examples of that. So that's what I just chalk this up to basically to incompetence. And yeah, that's how I see it. But certainly it's what can you say about it? And going from the video footage, Trump, it's incredible he survived. I mean, he literally was an inch or less away from having his head blown off because he turned his head at the exact right moment. It's really a miracle he wasn't killed. So just extraordinary.
It is, and we have to consider the possibilities if had he been killed. But the GOP, before we kind of set the stage for what happened, just another question for you. I mean, the GOP official talking point immediately after this apparent assassination attempt was that the Democrats had fueled it by comparing Trump to Hitler and constantly calling him an existential threat to democracy. You've been writing about Russiagate, and to me, that was one of the more insane campaigns against any president. John Brennan, former CIA director, who was obviously helping direct Russiagate from behind the scenes, called Trump a traitor on national TV. Were you surprised that this happened? Because I wasn't surprised. I felt like with all that instigation and incitement, it was borderline incitement to call a president a traitor, to completely concoct this conspiracy theory that he was working for a foreign power. I'm not shocked that something happened, but what we're seeing now, at least all the evidence points to this shooter being one of those nihilistic incel characters who has no ideology and just wanted to kill someone famous, kind of like Mark David Chapman, who shot John Lennon. So what do you think about what the GOP was saying? And did this surprise you?
No, it didn't surprise me. I think it's a great point to raise. But then, of course, it doesn't mean that necessarily was the cause of any of this, that the shooter was motivated by the years of being told that Trump is a Russian asset and a traitor and the next Hitler. But yes, in terms of like in a broader context, was I surprised? No, because when you call someone all those things, when there was that cover of the New Republic recently that basically painted Trump as literally Hitler. Um, and when you're told that over and over and over, people are going to naturally develop that impression that Trump is this existential threat to American democracy, because that's what the liberal media class has been saying for so long. Whether there was any causality there between all this and the shooter, I mean, that remains to be seen. But in a broader context, absolutely. No, I was not surprised. I mean, that's why, I mean, it's one of the so many reasons why all this mania around Trump and Russia was just so dangerous. But this is one of the reasons. It does fuel an atmosphere like this. And it became normalized. And why? I mean, again, not because American elites really are concerned with the worst of Trump's policies, because when those, when it comes to Trump's worst policies that I see are like his tearing up nuclear arms treaties with Russia, trying to overthrow governments like in Venezuela, transferring wealth from the lower classes to the wealthy. They didn't have a problem with that. Their problem with him is they just didn't like him as the face of their global war machine. And that's where all this hysteria around Trump comes from. And so in that climate of like neocon driven mania and using the same tools that they use to demonize foreign enemies to, in this case, demonize a domestic one, no, something like this is not surprising. But again, I just want to be clear. I'm not necessarily drawing a link between all of that and this individual shooter without knowing more about his individual motives.
Well, I really we need to turn to Brian Stelter to know what American fascism would look like. He's one of the contributors to this New Republic collection on Trump, which they then had to sort of justify. Yeah, I mean, the shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, they all have, first of all, why do they always have two first names? Or do you just get two first names if you become an assassin or would-be assassin? Like, would I be Max Jordan, they'd probably like make up it, Maxwell Jordan Blumenthal, just to make you seem like John Wayne Gacy and John Wilkes Booth. Did John Hinckley not have a middle name? I was, just like, my immediate reaction was that. And then when the leaked photo of Crooks' head blown off leaked, I thought, man, this guy looks like a cross between Elizabeth Warren and an occasional Grayzone contributor. And I started to get worried. I'm like, what motivated him? Are they going to say like, are they going to say he enjoyed reading Gateway Pundit and the Grayzone and far left and far right? Was he really ideologically motivated? Where is this going to lead to? And it kind of led to kind of a cul-de-sac where there doesn't seem to be any clear motive. He's, at least on the surface, one of these young celibate or, involuntary celibate males that, are increasingly common now, who don't have much contact with society, are very digitally competent, can encrypt things, and just are completely nihilistic. That's what it seems like on the surface. We haven't had a major assassination attempt on a president since 1981, John Hinckley shooting Reagan in the underarm. Apparently he too was one of these figures. He was motivated by the desire to impress Jodie Foster. But that followed the whole era of paranoia about real government plots to at least destroy, through COINTELPRO, revolutionary and reformist figures from the Kennedy brothers to Martin Luther King. There's a lot of intrigue around the killing of Malcolm X, who was killed by the Nation of Islam after leaving it. So many figures were just gunned down in the 60s. George Wallace was shot at a time when he threatened to split the Republican vote and weaken Nixon in the 72 campaign. This book came out at the kind of high point of, or I'd say the beginning of the birth of the sort of conspiracy and analysis movement, Government by Gunplay, which inspired the name of this stream. And Government by Gunplay can mean a lot of things. By the way, this was introduced by Philip Agee, who was sort of the first Julian Assange, or first Edward Snowden, who was a CIA whistleblower, first John Kiriakou. Harvey Azinian of the Assassination Information Bureau authored it. It's really worth reading this because these assassination plots or conspiracies about these plots, and the conspiracies were very plausible, were coming fast and furious at this time, edited by one Sid Blumenthal. Yeah, this book actually bought my parents' first car. He wrote about COINTELPRO and Fred Hampton. And then it just stopped. It stopped. And I've said again and again on this show that there are two reasons why we haven't seen so many of these assassinations. And it's number one, the government doesn't need to, or powerful forces don't need to assassinate an influential figure or an elected official who becomes influential and threatens to interfere with their objectives on the world stage, when they can just digitally assassinate them, throw lawfare campaigns at them, wrap them up in the courts, do what they do to us with Wikipedia, where it's just a gigantic bulletin board of smears and falsehoods collected through concocted stories like the recent Washington Post smear on us. And then it's all going to be fed into AI. So when any of you are seeking information about the Grayzone through ChatGPT, it immediately turns to Wikipedia and it says the Grayzone is a far left and far right conspiracy fringe site run by pro-Russian Assadist North Korean actor Max Blumenthal. You know, that's what it's going to do. That's what AI is going to do. So why be so inelegant and plant a car bomb or kill some journalist or some politician when you can just isolate them from polite society? But it failed with Trump, which I think is fueling a lot of the conspiracy theories, because they failed to stop him. They threw everything they had at him. Another reason why there haven't been so many assassinations as there were in the 1960s and 70s is the hegemony of the United States. Throughout the 1990s and the 2000s, there was kind of a consensus, a centrist consensus, and the Republican candidate would be someone that the same donors who support the Democratic Party could be comfortable with, because he was cutting their taxes and waging the same wars they wanted, and there were certain agreements where the third rail was never touched until the Trump era. The Trump era shattered the consensus on globalization, free trade, corporate free trade, shattered the consensus on the border, on obviously the post 9/11 war on terror in Iraq, and whether we should be in a perpetual state of war with Russia, whether Trump did anything or not. So Trump clearly was kind of a threat to the establishment, at least in what he would say, not necessarily in what he would do. So I wasn't surprised. I thought for some time that there would be a high chance that someone would take a shot at Trump. And in fact, Tucker Carlson said that someone was going to assassinate Donald Trump, given the rhetoric and the kind of lawfare campaigns that were targeting Trump. But then it turns out to be some guy who's a complete nihilist. We can look at just a little bit of the security failures through this incredible edit by Milk Bar TV. I sped it up so it might not be that good. Plenty of time to an opportunity to eliminate the threat.
Right there, see him? He's laying down. See him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
You can see that at 20 seconds, people in the crowd have identified Thomas Matthew Crooks on the, I think I should slow it down to its normal speed, on the roof.
And so I'm here with you fighting like hell to get a Senate.
What's happening?
And to make sure we take back the
I mean, everyone's stopping and watching as a guy's bear crawling on a roof with a sniper rifle, and no one's doing anything about it.
Because if we do, we're going to make America better than ever before. We're going to make it.
Yeah, look.
And it's
There he
not
is.
easy, because we have millions and millions of people in our country that shouldn't be here. Dangerous people, criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
on the roof.
It's much tougher than if it happened.
Right on the roof, big
Border
guy.
ever. In recorded history, we're the best border. In fact, if they could ever put up a chart, I don't know if they can do it. Do you guys have access to that chart that I love so much? You don't mind if I go off teleprompter, do you? Because these teleprompters are so damn boring. I try and explain that. Oh, there's it. Wow. You guys are doing it. They're getting better with time. my guys, take a look at that chart. Take a look at the arrow on the bottom. See the big red arrow, right? So that's when I left office. That was the lowest point, and that comes right from the government services, comes right out of Border Patrol. Take a look at that. So that arrow is the lowest amount of illegal immigration ever in recorded
going
history.
on and on. Well, here come the, I shouldn't have done that. The shots come at around 2 minutes. So you basically had a period of 1 minute and 48 seconds between the first identification of a guy bear crawling on a sloped roof, which was what you could call a sniper's paradise, unobstructed. Apparently he got up there with a ladder. Many people had identified him. And the time when a shot was taken at the former president, Trump. It's definitely one of the biggest security failures. And I think a third reason why we haven't seen so many assassination attempts on presidents, former presidents, lawmakers, is because of the proliferation and improvement of security and, CCTV systems everywhere.
I hope he's turning this way. Be careful, guys.
We got breaking news. Coming in. Shots fired. Seems to be shots fired at the Trump rally. Is he okay? We need to go live right now.
Someone was shot in the stands.
We are live right now at the Trump rally.
One shot right here, Mike.
We don't know if President Trump has been shot. We know he hit the ground. We do not know if President Trump has been shot. He's up. He's up.
Okay, wait a minute. First of all, why is he up? Like, they did the right thing in pouncing on him and surrounding him. How do they know there isn't a second shooter? Why did they let him up? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, that was just strange. And then they're just going to get him out of there. I guess, it makes sense to get him out because there might be a bomb threat, explosions. And apparently this shooter did prepare some kind of explosions, but he was shot immediately by a sniper who failed to get the order to take him out before he shot. And then Trump is able to.
Shots are still continuing to be fired. He's giving a thumbs up, everybody. He's giving a thumbs up.
And Trump is able to do this iconic moment in which Trump urges the crowd to fight, inspiring the Kid Rock anthem performed at the Republican National WrestleMania convention last night, and also triggering many liberals to develop their own conspiracy theory that this was some kind of staged event. Joy Reid, for example, suspecting that Trump had somehow planned this in order to indulge or solidify the idea that he's the target of a deep state coup, but he's touched by God, blessed by God to transcend all the plots against him, including the most dastardly plot, an assassination, because it played out so well for Trump. I think, you could also just look at Trump as just this kind of animal who's just like a ferocious political animal who is just determined to take power and is not going to be stopped. I've never seen anything like this in the history of assassination attempts. Well, it takes over 4 minutes for them to get him off stage. And so obviously there's a lot of questions for the Secret Service to answer. Here is one of the, I think this is valid on the part of Representative Corey Mills, who is, I think was a former sniper himself, former Army sniper. to speculate about the various scenarios and why the Secret Service had failed so badly. And I think this interview is significant not only because of what Corey Mills is saying, but because of the reaction of the CNN anchor. And it really shows it's like the role of corporate media playing out in real time as she tries to physically stop him from speculating that this may not have simply been an issue of fecklessness.
You know, I look at all of these things and I look at different videos where an assailant will pull a firearm on a law enforcement officer, and the first thing they do is they immediately pull and draw and mitigate the threat and the risk. You know, I ask why the law enforcement officer did not do so. The other thing is that when you set an advanced, we keep convinced about the perimeter elements. Yeah. You know, the perimeter is actually established by your threats that are in the area. So if I don't have any threats outside of 100 yards, okay, fine, I can cordon off a certain area. But if I have a building 160 yards perfectly adjacent to the stage, that's an obvious threat, especially when an elevated position has overwatch. That's a sniper's paradise. And, you know, we talk about egocentric. You also have, as no one talks about, but the water tower.
So what I'm hearing from you is it's the failure.
Okay, wait. In case you missed that, let's just watch that one more time.
For sure, but also the failure
adjacent to the stage. That's an obvious threat, especially when an elevated position has overwatch. That's a sniper's paradise. And, you know, we talk about egocentric. You also have, as no one talks about, but the water tower.
So what I'm hearing from
he says, you also have what no one talks about, the water tower. There was a water tower, an elevated position, slightly further away than the sloped roof. This has become the subject of many conspiracy theories, and she shuts him down immediately when he brings up the water tower.
you is it's a failure on the ground for sure, but ultimately a failure in advance.
I think it's a failure in advance. I think it's a failure to have the counter snipers to be able to establish their range and their sketch maps.
I also heard we also know that local snipers were stationed inside that building.
I haven't heard that piece of it yet, but that doesn't necessarily make sense unless they were actually in a window which was backed off, because a lot of times you would get yourself in there. Sometimes you expose your rifle in a way to try and do a force protection or a show of force that actually stops things. Others are actually more tactical, where they'll sit back a little bit, but a sniper for the law enforcement is only trained to shoot about 75 yards, unlike your counter sniper teams that are on sunset. But here's my problem. In having done this for so long, they always say the adage of ignorance is bliss, and I think that's true. I've done thousands of advances. I've done thousands of counter sniper operations with our teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. The amount of negligence, the amount of mistakes that was made here, I have a very difficult time not leaning myself towards this was intentional as opposed to fecklessness.
Wow. Okay, talk to me about that. I actually heard you say this right the day after, which I wanted to ask you about. What do you mean intentional?
CNN's about to freak out.
Intentional failure on the part of...
No, I wouldn't say intentional failure on the part of, but I've got to just, I sit here and I scratch my head. You don't want to be the conspiracist. You don't want to be the...
I'm telling you, because that's what it's leading to.
No, I know. And that's the issue, is that you walk this fine balance of, you're not trying to be a conspiracist, but you look at it and you go, how could this have gone so...
But it's one thing if someone on the street says it. It's not, I mean, you, Corey Mills, member of Congress, former sniper...
Oh, yeah, it's one thing if one of our street rats say it.
Eyebrows go up. When you say you're walking the line on this, intentional what?
You know, it almost seems to me, I think that an investigation is necessary at this point within Congress, not just the FBI, not just others. I look back at it and I'm thinking, all right, for an individual, if you look at the escalations and how they try to approach him, let's just say that it was like, okay, first we want to censor and silence you, then we want to indict and imprison you, now we're attempting to kill you and take
you.
Exactly.
I'm hearing two things from you. I don't want to jump ahead of things, but I'm also hearing you jumping ahead of things.
When she proceeds to shut him down for the rest of the interview. And yes, there is no concrete evidence that there was an intentional stand down on the part of the Secret Service, but you could also say January 6th, I was there, I witnessed it. I saw a complete stand down of law enforcement for several hours, and it raised a lot of questions, especially about what happened next. So I think it's fair for people, even, and they're obviously ideologically aligned with Trump, part of the MAGA movement. I still think it's fair for them to be asking these questions, and there should be a congressional investigation. And obviously, Kimberly Cheadle, the head of Secret Service, should be fired and should be the first person subpoenaed, especially after what she said when asked about why there were no counter snipers and Secret Service on the roof, which was the most obvious place for a sniper to be.
Should that roof have been secure, period?
That building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point. And so, there's a safety factor that would be considered there, that we wouldn't want to put somebody up on a sloped roof. And so, the decision was made to secure the building from inside. That's
incredible. A lot of, Trump supporters on social media are tweeting and posting videos of cows walking on sloped roofs. Cows can walk on sloped roofs. In fact, the counter sniper team, the Secret Service counter sniper team, was on a sloped roof at the time when they took out Thomas Matthew Crooks. So it's such a bizarre statement, and it's so incredible that she's still in her job. And then, you know, relating to that water tower, the water tower theory, there are 3 interviews on video of people at the scene who said they saw someone on the water tower. They brought up a water tower. CNN published acoustic analysis of the shots and recorded 3 separate gunshots. So 3 shots from 3 separate muzzles. It could be 2 counter snipers and just Thomas Matthew Crooks. But I think that there needs to be an investigation to put this all to rest, and that the reason that people are so conspiratorial is not necessarily the history of presidential assassinations, because that history is so far in the rearview mirror. It is the recent history of incitement for Donald Trump's death and hysteria, the sheer hysteria about what Donald Trump and the Trump era represented as the shattering of the centrist consensus, and the idea that they threw everything they could at him. Everything possible was thrown at Trump politically and legally, and he's still on his feet and likely to be the next president. And you even had people say publicly that the only thing that could stop him was a bullet.
Just sit back on the sidelines and say, oh, well, don't worry, this will all work itself out. They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump. Just sit back on the side.
That's Rick Wilson from the centrist corporate Republican huckstering Lincoln Project, basically saying, no, we can't just sit back and play politics and run a campaign against Trump. We got to put a bullet in him.
I mean, that clip is like edited very shortly, so I wouldn't be surprised if after that he says something to qualify what he says there. I don't think he was calling for Trump's literal assassination.
No, he wasn't calling for it. He's basically metaphorically
yeah.
saying we got to do something big to stop Trump.
Yeah, well, so yeah, given everything you just laid out, the history, including him being framed as a Russian asset, I totally get why people are skeptical. And I also agree that I can't believe that comment from the Secret Service director that we couldn't put people there because of the sloped roof. I don't know how she hasn't been fired just for saying that. I mean, if you couldn't necessarily blame her for this incident because she wasn't on the ground, so maybe, you know, obviously whoever was on the ground, there had to be someone in charge. But certainly just for that comment, she should be fired, because obviously the sloped roof didn't stop the shooter from being on top of it. So it shouldn't then stop the Secret Service from making sure no one can get on it. But yeah, I think this was to me, it's negligence. But I do think if it were Biden, I don't think the screw up would have happened. I do think they would have been more careful because he's the active president. And I think because this is Trump, he's not in office. And these institutions are notoriously just negligent and not very good at what they do, that this happened. And the fact that Trump was able to get that image from it is just, you know, I think knowing who he is, he has his finger on the pulse. He probably, when he was on the ground, realized he was okay. And then he wanted that photo op and he got it. And it's probably going to help him win the presidency just like that, because that's an incredible photograph.
Yeah. And what it says about Trump at a time when the current president is barely alive it's just, the contrast couldn't be more stark. So Kimberly Cheadle really doesn't know what to say about the security failure. And so this comes out as the Secret Service faces a crisis, a public relations crisis and a political crisis of unprecedented proportions. This suddenly appears in CNN with none other than Natasha Bertrand, Russiagate huckster, on the byline. Exclusive: Secret Service ramped up security after intel of Iran plot to assassinate Trump. No known connection to shooting.
Yeah.
Let's see. What's the sourcing on this? U.S. authorities obtained intelligence from a human source in recent weeks on a plot by Iran to try to assassinate Donald Trump. So one single anonymous human source, who could just be anybody, It could be Kimberly Cheadle. It could be Masih Alinejad. It could be anybody. But it's a single anonymous human source claiming Iran wanted to assassinate Trump, which is just completely outside Iran's MO at a time when they've just elected a reformist president who wants to negotiate. They're going to do this. It seems like a major deflection and also part of a broader campaign in the three-letter agencies to demonize Iran and prevent diplomacy. We also saw the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, and her office release a bogus, similarly poorly sourced report claiming that Iran was sponsoring the Palestine Solidarity Movement protesting against Israel's Gaza genocide. So I don't know how this can be taken seriously, but it obviously looks like an attempt by the Secret Service to sort of deflect. And then the way it's being reported is, well, they ramped up Trump security. Well, if they ramped it up, then where was it?
Yeah, exactly.
And now we're also hearing that Thomas Matthew Crooks was communicating with 3 encrypted sites with possible foreign actors. So they're trying to implicate Iran even further.
Yeah. What they probably did here was just take the fact that after Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, Iran said something about, taking revenge. And they probably just basically took that, and in the aftermath of this actual assassination attempt against Trump, basically recycled that and used that to say that they've uncovered some sort of new plot. When really that's been known for a long time that Iran said they would seek revenge. But of course, there's no evidence at all, I'm sure, that they've tried to go after Trump, because otherwise we would have heard about that by now. The Qasem Soleimani attempt was a long time ago. So of course, this is them trying to take advantage of this moment to stir up tensions with Iran. And of course, Republicans, including Congressmember Mike Turner, who is he's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. He ran with this because this perfectly suits their agenda.
Department, the Secret Service, and the FBI will brief senators tomorrow on the assassination attempt on former President Trump. As I said, tomorrow. And it comes in the context of Iran now forcefully denying a separate plot on Trump's life. Joining me now is Republican Congressman Mike Turner, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And Chairman, I very much appreciate your time. So let me just ask you about this breaking news. As we understand it from our reporting, the U.S. receiving intelligence on an Iranian plot to assassinate Trump, which we understand was based on the intelligence from a human source. Do you know anything about this?
Human?
First off, Aaron, this is based upon a known and continuous and existing threat from Iran to President Trump and members of his cabinet. This has been ongoing. It has certainly been an issue of needing increased security also for those former cabinet members. Now, I don't know the specific intelligence that shows that there's an increase or specific threat. They are in the process of briefing both myself and staff. But one thing is clear here is that President Biden needs to make clear that this would be an act of war, that clearly Iran would pay a horrible price for any attempt to attack Donald Trump.
So, this is typical. An actual assassination attempt against Trump. The Secret Service is fully negligent. It's a young white man from Pennsylvania. Everyone knows it's nothing to do with Iran or any other foreign power, but yet they don't waste the opportunity to start beating the drums of war.
Yeah, and Mike Turner, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, means that he's not just a tool for these 3-letter agencies, but also the 3-letter think tanks like the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies that are constantly feeding reports to the Intelligence Committee on Iran. And as we'll see from the lowlights of the Republican convention, conflict with Iran is a top priority of the GOP donor class. I do think it's worth mentioning Donald Trump has used assassination as a tool in his administration. It's a tool in the toolbox of the Israelis, not just against Palestinians, but against one another. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated to kill the Oslo Accords. Leah Rabin, his widow, blamed Benjamin Netanyahu as the main instigator of her husband's assassination. And much of the Palestinian leadership has been assassinated by Israel in order to get the results that they want, to groom loyal puppets and put puppets into power. We're seeing them use it in the Gaza Strip today with the latest attempt to kill Mohammed Deif, the chief of staff or leader of the Al-Qassam brigades, dropping a 2,000-pound bomb on a quote-unquote safe area, the Mawasi area in Khan Yunis, killing over 100 people. And I think people who follow Donald Trump, who are Trumpsters, who are part of the MAGA movement, should step back for a second. Not that they will. They tend to be American exceptionalists to the extreme. And maybe they can understand why millions of people flooded into the streets after Trump ordered, under pressure from Mike Pompeo and Benjamin Netanyahu, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, and why people in Gaza and across historic Palestine revere Mohammed Deif, who's survived over 5 assassination attempts and may have even survived this 2,000-pound bomb, and who is said to be barely disfigured. I was a neighborhood away when Israel attempted to assassinate him in 2014 and killed his entire family with another 2,000-pound bomb. The West uses assassination freely, without, just casually assassinates people all around the world. And I'm not saying chickens have come home to roost, because it looks like some nihilistic American white man who wanted to just kill somebody famous took a shot at Donald Trump. But we're an extremely violent imperial society that uses assassination as a tool. And it's something to reflect on, given the obvious trauma that this caused a lot of people and the inspiration that they feel around Donald Trump, to consider how other societies feel about their leaders who've been the target of so many attempts or have been killed.
I think that's a great point.
I just don't, go ahead.
Well, those are great points. And you would never hear that kind of a considerate point being made on corporate TV or even, in some lefty media, because we're not allowed to think about other people around the world as equals. Everything is so exceptionalist. How could this happen to us, a political leader being the target of assassination attempt, when we do that, as you point out, and we encourage that all the time, including Trump himself against Qasem Soleimani. I just wanted to point out quickly that, since we mentioned how Republicans use this to demonize Iran, the Democrats have their own version of this. What did Blue Anon say about this? Well, Dimitri Melhorn, who is a top advisor to Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn founder, huge Democratic Party donor, he's been responsible for funding all sorts of scam, Russiagate projects. Wasn't he also behind the Shadow app that undermined Bernie in Iowa? I think he was. Yeah. So anyway, Dimitri Melhorn
didn't undermine. They stole the Iowa caucus from Bernie. They just straight up stole it with this Shadow app.
Yeah. So Dimitri Melhorn is a top advisor to Reid Hoffman, this Democratic billionaire, and Dimitri Melhorn wrote, one possibility is that this shooting was encouraged and maybe even staged so Trump could get the photos and benefit from the backlash. This is a classic Russian tactic, such as when Putin killed 300 civilians in 1999 and blamed it on terrorists to ride the backlash to winning power, which of course is not what happened. He's referring, I think, to the apartment bombings.
Yeah.
So anyway, according to this guy, Dimitri Melhorn, top advisor,
classic Russian tactic.
Classic Russian tactic.
I think that was all a narrative cooked up by the MI6 anyway, that Putin carried out the apartment bombings as a false flag, and it was spun out through the BBC documentary on Putin. But that's not like established history anyway.
No, it's not. There's a biography about Putin by Philip Short, I think that's his name, and he goes through this and he says there's no evidence at all connecting Putin to that. And so anyway, it's not just like Putin supporters who say that he was not tied at all to that bombing. It's and it makes total sense that was like an MI6 or an intelligence concoction.
Well, yeah. And I am not going to make any definitive statement, even on the Blue Anon conspiracy theories. It's such an unusual moment. The result of it is Donald Trump coasting to the White House. Anything is possible between now and November, but that's where the money's at. So again, I think it's natural for people like Dimitri Melhorn to speculate that, just as it's natural for, I think, people who support Trump and just anybody to analyze what happened and ask questions. We can't be definitive about it. And yeah, it kind of is chickens coming home to roost, Also, when you consider how awash the United States is in weapons and how easy it is to get a weapon, and how Donald Trump and the GOP have supported that scenario. What was Uvalde? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
what is happening in this country? So, I mean,
It's such a
I
violent
expect
place.
it's one of the most violent places on earth, and I've witnessed it in Washington D.C. just night after night, hearing shootings, witnessing shootings, I've seen people carried out in stretchers in Washington D.C. who are friends of friends. You just live among violence in an American city, and the idea that it isn't going to affect the extreme wealthy is an exceptional, or powerful is an exceptionalist idea, whether it's in the inner city or Gaza or Iran. You're not immune.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like a society that's so normalized what's happening in Gaza, where every single day entire civilian blocks are just being wiped out with US weapons. And every day anybody can see footage of countless atrocities committed against, babies, children, grown men and women. And how normal that is, and how the politicians from both parties who support it face no consequences whatsoever. In a society like that, it's just violence is normalized in ways we can't even comprehend. And of course, couple that with, as you're talking about all the guns we have here, it's surprising that stuff like this actually doesn't happen more often. As frequent as it happens, it's kind of a miracle it doesn't happen even more often than we see it.
Well, there was the RNC was a mixed bag on that note of imperial violence and the post 9/11 thirst for war in the Middle East. The RNC was a mixed bag. I would say it was refreshing to see some speakers at the Republican National Convention question war, and that's simply a response to their constituents and the Republican base, which is just fed up, which became fed up with committing men and materiel to wars like Iraq. And they're questioning Ukraine. But at the same time, the preponderance of pressure and influence from the Zionist billionaire class on the Republican Party is so extreme that you have this kind of schizophrenic approach of Trump or other speakers, even J.D. Vance, questioning the logic of pumping more billions into Ukraine. And at the same time, Trump appeared to threaten to attack the Gaza Strip.
And the entire world, I tell you this, we want our hostages back, and they better be back before I assume office, or you will be paying a very big price.
I mean, our hostages? Who are our hostages? I thought they were Israeli. So, and then what is the big price? He's threatening Hamas. I don't think it will come to that. But this was, part of the Miriam Adelson section for the mega donor who's pledged $100 billion to Trump. Trump similarly issued threats to Iran, kind of promises to starve Iran. And, before the convention, J.D. Vance made similar comments.
Israel, which would have never happened if I was president. Iran was broke. Iran had no money. Now Iran has $250 billion. They made it all over the last 2.5 years. They were broke. I watched the other day on a show called Deface the Nation. Has anyone seen it? And they had a congressman who was a Democrat say, well, whether you like him or not, Iran was broke dealing with Trump. I told China and other countries, if you buy from Iran, we will not let you do any business in this country, and we will put tariffs on every product you do send in of 100% or more. And they said to me, well, I think that's about it. They weren't going to buy any oil. And they were ready to make a deal. Iran was going to make a deal with us. And then we had that horrible, horrible result that we'll never let happen again. The election result, we're never going to let that happen again.
They used COVID to cheat. We're never going to let it happen again.
Oh, you're talking about the
They took
Iran
off all
election.
the sanctions and they did everything possible for Iran. And now Iran is very close to having a nuclear weapon, which would have never happened. This is a shame what this administration did.
But this underscores why Biden and his team are just so negligent, because they could have reversed what Trump did, returned to the Iran deal or something like it, but they chose to continue his policy because they're feckless and they have no political courage. For them, they're so committed to U.S. hegemony that they'd rather undermine their own policy, which was the Iran deal when they served with Obama. They'd rather undermine their own policy than do anything that takes a step back from hegemony and shows Iran that actually, America can actually engage in diplomacy and deal with people. They could have blamed it all on Trump, saying Trump did this, Trump undid the deal, we're undoing Trump's legacy, he was a threat to the planet, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't, because they don't have any courage. And so now we're in the situation where, Iran is closer to developing a weapon if they wanted it, but that's because of Trump, and then Biden walked away from an Iran deal that was working. And who knows if Iran would have maybe walked away from the deal at some point if they wanted to, but they were complying with it and it was working fine. And so we're stuck between Trump, who, whatever, because of, I don't know why he has this hatred for Iran. He won't deal with them. And he even tries to kill their leaders. And he did kill one of their top leaders.
Because of the Adelson money.
Yeah, because
it's for his. I mean, it's for the GOP donor class.
Yeah, and
Trump
then Biden
doesn't want
has
to
the
dip
same policy.
into his own fortune.
Yeah,
Tony Blinken, when he was being confirmed, asked I think Marco Rubio asked him, "Do you support the assassination? Did you support the assassination of Soleimani?" And he just said, "Yes, I did." Like, why would you support that if you supported an Iran deal, which was designed actually to rein Iran in and to actually weaken Iran's internal revolutionary forces, and to eventually section Iran off from supporting Palestine, from supporting the resistance axis? That was the whole point of the Iran deal from the US perspective. And if you support that, why would you have supported the killing of Soleimani, which consolidated Iran's revolutionary forces, which consolidated the position of the IRGC and made many Iranians understand that there was simply no dealing with the West, because you can change administrations. The West is so politically unstable, and you'll change administrations from one that wants to deal with you to one that wants to kill your top general, your second most powerful political figure, while he's on his way to a peace conference with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the legacy of Soleimani. So I don't whatever Trump's rhetoric is going to achieve, it doesn't matter. It's designed mainly to just cultivate his Zionist donors. That's why they brought up a fake anti-Semitism victim to complain about how mistreated he was
at Harvard
University. What is his name? Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Yeah.
And he, 1 week before it, identified as a Democrat. CNN identified him as an anti-Semitism activist.
Ugh.
Then they had 15 minutes of Israeli American family complaining about their son being taken, quote unquote, hostage in Gaza. Didn't mention that their son was literally in a tank patrolling the frontiers of the Gaza concentration camp on October 7th and had chosen to become a member of a foreign army as an American. He's actually a prisoner of war. That was all for Adelson, for Bernard Marcus, another major Zionist GOP donor, Larry Ellison. So many of these guys that are contributing to Trump are contributing on the basis of support for Israel, along with tax cuts, big tax cuts. So JD Vance being named VP freaked out some of the neocons who support the Democratic Party. I saw Jake Tapper kind of getting kind of triggered about Vance's views on Ukraine. Also the appearance of David Sachs. I don't know if you saw David Sachs's speech on the first night of the RNC, but he accused the Biden administration of provoking Russia into invading by NATOizing Ukraine, which was really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, and then he said that Biden then sabotaged the peace deal that was reached in Turkey in early 2022, which you're not allowed to say on corporate TV. That's never, even the fact those peace talks occurred is not even acknowledged because it's so damning to the proxy war narrative. So
yeah,
that is a case where inside the Republican Party and inside, Trump's wing, there is room for criticism of this neocon policy when it comes to Russia. But I'm curious, at the Democratic Party convention, are they going to allow similar criticism of Biden's policy on Gaza, even though there is a contingent inside the Democratic Party that is very critical of him? I doubt it. I really doubt it. But I should say Trump, in his speech last night, when he was talking about Ukraine, he did warn about the threat of World War III. But then in talking about the causes for the Ukraine proxy war, he didn't say this was about we provoke Russia or we sabotage peace deals. He adopted a neocon talking point, which is that this was because Biden withdrew from Afghanistan and Putin sensed his weakness and took advantage of it. That's the
and he said Putin wanted to overrun all of Ukraine, which is also a neocon talking point. Here's David Sachs just for reference.
Then he provoked the Russians to invade Ukraine with talk of NATO expansion.
Yes, that's true. This threw Democratic neocons into conniption fits.
Ukraine, including a deal to end the war just 2 months after it broke out. Then,
so for those who don't know, also true. David Sachs is a Silicon Valley tech billionaire who, has made some positive interventions within the Republican Party on Ukraine specifically. I don't agree with him on a lot of other things, but that was a refreshing moment. And you won't see speakers like that or that kind of anything remotely politically open on foreign policy at any Democratic convention. It's going to be much more controlled.
Yeah, for example, on Gaza, I bet you the most they'll allow anyone like, say, Bernie or AOC to say is that there should be more humanitarian aid allowed into Gaza. I don't think they'll be saying we need a ceasefire now and we're facilitating genocide. There's no way they'll allow that. They'll allow basically the progressives to call for more humanitarian aid. That's, I think, the extent to which they'll permit dissenting voices when it comes to Gaza.
Well, JD Vance has written or published a New York Times op-ed calling for severely reducing, if not ending, military aid to Ukraine and ending the war. Do you think there's any chance JD Vance can make any difference there? Or I should just ask, what do you think about his selection as VP?
Well, look, I have to say, among all the choices for who could be Trump's VP, I think he's by far the best. Just given that on some issues, I think he's sensible, including on the Ukraine proxy war. That doesn't mean I like him. It doesn't mean I don't find some of his views objectionable, but it is true. I'm not going to deny it that on some issues, including this catastrophic proxy war, he speaks sense. He does. He voted against that massive transfer to the military-industrial complex of $61 billion for the Ukraine war. And anyone who does that, who's now in a position of power, I think that's a good thing. Whether that makes a difference, if I'm making bets, I would say no. Look, Trump talked a really big game in 2016. He was, called out the neocons, called out military interventions, but in office, it's true. He likes to claim he didn't start any new wars, but he almost did with trying to kill Soleimani. He tried to overthrow the government of Venezuela. And when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, yes, the invasion didn't happen under his watch, but he sent weapons to Ukraine that Obama wouldn't send. And he tore up, this is maybe even more important than the weapons to Ukraine. He tore up incredibly important arms control treaties that radically escalated the threats between the U.S. and Russia, especially the INF treaty. And that was a major factor in Russia's invasion because Russia, by force, was trying to compel the diplomacy and the arms control that had been undermined in part by Trump. Not entirely by Trump, but in part. So going by history, I wouldn't expect anything. But then again, to be fair, Trump has chased out a lot of the neocons that he appointed. John Bolton won't be coming back. Mike Pompeo is still in his good graces, so he'll be angling for a position. And certainly they're really upset about JD Vance being appointed. So anytime a neocon is upset, I have to take that as a positive sign. Although I'm not holding my breath that it will accomplish very much when it comes to actual policy changes.
Yeah, I agree. JD Vance, in his speech and accepting the VP nomination, talked about how debate should be encouraged within the party. And that was a reference to his differences with figures like Pompeo. But I think they'll ultimately win the debate because the preponderance of force is on their side within the national security architecture. I would say Pompeo could be likely to be CIA director all over again. And who would be Secretary of State? Well, some little figure who's been infesting the RNC, was constantly doing punditry on CNN, was seated next to or in proximity to Trump, was Marco Rubio, who could be one of the worst and most disastrous secretaries of state. If you thought anyone could be worse than Tony Blinken, Marco Rubio could possibly be that. I mean, he's been kind of angling throughout his entire career in the Senate to do that. And one thing they want beyond war with Iran is conflict with China over the Taiwan Strait. I think JD Vance is somewhat on board with that. The thing about JD Vance is he's very close to Tucker Carlson. Tucker seems to have kind of taken him under his wing. And so JD is a conduit for Tucker within the White House, which is fairly positive because, as we've discussed, even though Tucker's taken a very strong anti-China line, he's also spoken out against military conflict with China. He convinced Trump to oppose attacking Iran at one point during the Trump administration. And he's even started to allow bring criticism of Israel and Israeli apartheid specifically and explicitly by giving a voice to Palestinian Christians into the MAGA world. So I think there's going to be a massive conflict between JD Vance and the neocon hardliners that are definitely going to take cabinet level foreign policy positions and positions within the NSC. We can look to Trump to try to create kind of a shadow NSC kitchen cabinet, as he did when he had his little, council with Steve Bannon, who's now in jail. And things are just going to kind of come apart at the seams pretty quickly. There was already pressure on Trump to pick Doug Burgum of North Dakota from Rupert Murdoch. And basically Murdoch this was widely reported that Murdoch saw Burgum as a means of controlling Trump on issues like Ukraine. So having live Trump enter office is not going to end the plotting and scheming against an actual America First policy. And of course, Donald Trump has already signed on to Miriam Adelson's policy from Palestine to Iran.
What I found striking about the Biden administration is that there's no conflict, at least that I can see. They're all on board. They're all neocons. There's no dissent at all on the Ukraine proxy war and no dissent at all on Gaza. I mean, there have been leaks suggesting that Kamala Harris has tried to make speeches that got edited, but even then her stance is it's indistinguishable from Biden's publicly and based on everything we know about her private stance. So any conflict, I think, would be better than the current status quo, which is just like a demented neocon Biden who really believes as if he seems to believe that he's weakening Russia when meanwhile Ukraine just being decimated before our eyes and losing people and losing territory. Anything to me is better than that because inside the Obama White House, there were some differences of opinion. There are people who are not on board with bombing Libya or bombing Syria. There's no indication of that at all right now inside the Biden White House. Blinken, Sullivan, Samantha Power, up until recently, Victoria Nuland, they all seem to be in total lockstep. And so it will be interesting if Trump is the president to see how these two factions of his MAGA wing, the neocons, which really dominated his first term. In fact, were entirely the makeup of his first cabinet versus maybe people who are not the people who are upset now about JD Vance. The people who are encouraged now by JD Vance and represent that wing, which is not neocon. That'll be interesting to see if that results in actual changes, because it certainly isn't under Biden.
Yeah, and I don't think JD Vance really is a Christian Zionist or feels particularly passionate about Israel, but he's just going along with it. He's going to completely go along with the Israel lobby because of the donor class that has backed Donald Trump, and also because of the GOP base that showed up to the convention of Christian Zionists. This is the America First beauty pageant winner that Michael Tracy photographed there. We don't know her name, but we saw photos like this throughout Michael Tracy's feed. Yeah, which one is first? And
listen to the interviews that Michael did with lawmakers, with Republican lawmakers from the convention. You really get the sense. I mean, this is not just about seeing Israel as like a valuable client state. There really is a Christian fundamentalist thing going on amongst all these people.
Yeah.
They all talked about how this is God's will, that we support the chosen people, blah blah blah. I mean, on their end, it really is. You can't just say it's the lobby and it's just seeing Israel as a valuable client state. It's evangelical Christianity, which makes the Democrats, again, why are they so on board with this apartheid state, this mass murdering apartheid state? Because they don't have that Christian component.
Well, that's why the Democrats have a conflict where the party is undemocratic. It's not a small d Democratic party. They don't have constituents like this. They do have some, Jewish Zionists in Boca Raton and New York, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz's district.
Right.
In, Richie Torres's district, there's like Riverdale. So they do have some grassroots constituents who support Israel, but it's primarily a donor class Haim Saban thing. And the increasingly diverse, younger base that's supposed to be represented by the Democratic Party is not on board at all. So you have this conflict, which is going to play out at the Democratic National Convention, which is why I'm looking into possibly doing a live Grayzone event outside the convention to just try to convene those forces somewhere and channel that energy. There's nothing like that going on around the Republican Party. They don't care about Palestinian Christians. Palestinian Christians were not born again in the blood of the Lamb. They tend not to be born again evangelicals. They are in the way of Revelation, fulfilling the prophecy in Revelation. And this figure, this person, this beauty pageant winner, I definitely don't want to be where Judea and Samaria is here. She is one of the reasons why the GOP, the House GOP, is so insanely pro-Israel that they basically would like to eliminate all forms of speech that are critical of Israel. They want to change the First Amendment to create a Palestine exception. I mean, they literally do with the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Its co-authors were on the House floor were on the RNC floor. They don't see any contradiction between Israel first and America first. So there is still some contestation on that issue within the Democratic Party. Within the Republican Party, the contestation is around Ukraine. I wish we could sort of, combine that, but for whatever reason, liberals believe that, for Ukraine is their Israel. Aaron, we should cover the euthanization plot against Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, if you were watching the U.S. media closely on Thursday, July 18th, you would have believed that Biden was about to drop out of the race, because in story after story, in top outlets, unnamed sources close to the president were all saying it was just imminent that he was going to drop out, and he was even working on his exit speech, and the family was preparing his next plans. But none of these stories had any names to them. Nobody was saying on record that was putting their name behind a claim that Biden was about to drop out. The people who were putting their names out there were people like Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, who through leaks were basically said to be encouraging Biden to drop out. But in terms of confirming that Biden was leaving, nobody was actually going on record to say that. And it turns out that looks like that was just a pressure campaign, that actually Biden's not dropping out, but that these people who were so desperate to drive him out were making it appear that he was, in the hopes that that would push him over the edge. But by all appearances, based on what's come from his people and based on what he said, he's not going anywhere. He's staying. So we're looking at a summer of just more madness of this, one of the most just outward intra-elite feuds we've ever seen, where the donors, the big money, the top leadership, lawmakers, top senators are now calling for Biden to resign, but he's not leaving. It looks like he's staying put.
Yeah, I don't know how it works, what the process will be to replace Biden, and how they will supersede or dislodge Kamala, who obviously would be disastrous as well. But it doesn't seem like Biden can last through the next week or two, especially after this unusual diagnosis with COVID, which came hours after he declared that if a doctor stated that he had a serious health condition, he would agree to drop out. So he creates this caveat. I don't think he stated that in an interview, and then suddenly gets a COVID diagnosis. Mega donors are plotting to change Biden's mind with money. Will it work? This is the New York Times headline. There have been lots of reports on mega donors, Abigail Disney, Larry Fink, all these figures who pump money into the Democratic Party, pushing Biden, seeking to push Biden out. The latest conniving figure to come out and demand that Biden leave, Adam Schiff, also Jamie Raskin, both of whom are proxies for Nancy Pelosi. So basically, Pelosi is stating through these figures that Biden's a drag on down ticket races. There's a new poll showing 70% of Democrats want Biden to drop out. I don't know how he stays in, especially after what Trump was able to do when an assassin's bullet pierced his ear. So what happened here? What happened to me, in my view, is that the media was protecting Biden from what the rest of us could all see, what was staring us in the face, which was that he had dementia for years and that this whole scenario was inevitable. And they were doing so in de facto collaboration with the billionaire donor class, because Biden provided first a really effective vehicle in 2020 for asphyxiating the final gasps of the Bernie Sanders-led liberal left grassroots insurgency that began in Zuccotti Park almost a decade before, of squeezing it out of existence, and then Bernie, delivering the nail in the coffin by endorsing Biden and campaigning with him, just as he did for Hillary, as the Democratic Party elite knew he would, but just shunting all of those young people with all their college debt to the side. And then in 2024, Biden was needed again to prevent a primary amidst a Gaza genocide in which some possible figure could have given voice once again to the grassroots left, which was out in the streets and up in arms about children being killed at an industrial scale with Biden delivered baby buster bombs day after day. So Biden got them this far. He protected the pro-billionaire centrist consensus to this point. And all of a sudden at the debate, the weekend at Biden's gig was up. Jig was up. They couldn't protect him any longer. He stood exposed. I thought those rules were actually going to benefit Biden, that Trump couldn't interrupt, but what it wound up doing was exposing Biden. And that was it. It's been all downhill since then. Biden thought he could recover with his NATO press conference. And I think, there were points where you saw flashes of the old Biden, who was a fairly lucid neocon. But he also, it also appeared that he said that he had sex with the wife of NATO Secretary General Jens
was the
Stoltenberg.
last and one of the most consequential periods in its history. I realize, I was talking to your wife, I personally asked you to extend your service. Forgive me. And you put your eyes.
Yeah, I think
I
he's
don't
saying
know.
there.
He might have been saying I was talking to your wife.
Yeah, I was talking to your wife. That's
but
what
then
he's saying.
he's
Yeah.
But then he stops out of nowhere and he's like, "Forgive me,"
Yeah,
and that kind
yeah.
of it
Nice.
leads people to do the cheap
Yeah.
fake because it's like,
Yeah, no.
why did he just stop and ask for forgiveness?
He can't put a sentence together. I mean, that was at that same event. He also called Zelensky Putin, and he referred to Kamala Harris as Vice President Trump. Yeah, no, it's an embarrassment. And then when you again in his interviews and in private meetings, he's just so upset. People can't appreciate the job he's doing because he really believes he's taking on Putin. Like there's been all these interviews now and leaks where, for example, the latest one was in a meeting of Democratic lawmakers, Congressmember Jason Crow, who's a hardcore hawk, especially when it comes to Russia, is telling Biden basically that, look, it's not landing. The voters aren't going to reelect you. We have to make a change. And Biden's berating him because he's saying, every foreign leader, no one respects any leader more than they respect me. And he really believes that. He's completely out to lunch. When meanwhile, what are foreign leaders saying about Biden? Well, there's leaks saying that, he couldn't even attend a recent European meeting because Antony Blinken said he had to go to bed. And so Antony Blinken came in his place. So that's what foreign leaders are saying about Biden. But Biden's so out of it that he really thinks that not only is he beating Vladimir Putin, but also that everybody respects him when really everyone's making fun of him and cringing at everything he says.
Yeah. And the Trump campaign wants him in the race.
Oh,
They're
for sure.
being very careful in how much they attack him because they want him to stay there for as long as possible. So everyone gets it now. The Democratic Party elite gets it. He can't stay there, but they put him there, which means they put all of their constituents there, and all their constituents are going to be delivered some disastrous campaign where he's replaced by some Patrick Bateman-like figure like the governor of California or Kamala Harris, who, I mean, it's going to be absurd to hear Kamala Harris attempt to talk about complex foreign policy issues. It's just going to be very damaging for the Democratic Party. She's going to be a laughingstock. The Democratic Party elite did this, and they're going to invalidate the votes of millions and millions of people who voted for Biden for whatever reason in the most anti-democratic fashion possible. But they did this to kill the left. They did this to stop Bernie. They did this to stop the primary. They did this to stop democracy. And they're going to now euthanize Biden undemocratically while they hope for some force to stop Donald Trump because they're not going to stop him. So we should be, I mean, if you're a Democrat, you should be up in arms. You shouldn't be taking it at the convention. You should be looking for the closest billionaire and, I don't know, take out your frustration on them because they did this to you. They're delivering the campaign for Trump, and I'm sure they'll be fine with Trump being there because they'll get their tax cuts. But they won't do it. The Democratic Party, whatever their grassroots is, they're not going to do it. They're just going to like pivot to the next candidate. I don't think they even understand what's being done to them. I don't think the Republicans would take this, but the Democrats just do. I'm hoping there are massive protests outside the Democratic convention. But by the way, though, I mean, Aaron, we've been talking about how demented Joe Biden is, watching his slurred speech. What he continues to actually say is sickening when he talks about, for example, Gaza or October 7th. And I think it's another reason that he should be replaced, but he should be replaced with someone who calls for a ceasefire, which you're not hearing from any of the Democratic Party elite because they don't want that either. Watch this.
Why is your and United States at the current moment support for Israel so strong?
Look, Israel if there weren't an Israel, every Jew in the world would be at risk. Every Jew in the world would be at risk.
And that's why October 7th happened, because it was protecting Jews.
And so there's a need for it to be strong and a need for Israel to be able to have, after World War II, the ability for Jews to have a place that was their own. But you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And the Zionist is about whether or not Israel is a safe haven for Jews because of their history of how they've been persecuted.
Are you a Zionist?
Yes. Now you'll be able to make a lot out of that because people don't know what a Zionist is. Do you know what a Zionist is?
I just ask questions, I don't answer.
By the way,
the Biden, he keeps threatening interviewers and challenging them and shouting at them. That's another thing he continues to do.
I'm the guy that did more for the Palestinian community than anybody. I'm the guy that opened up all the assets. I'm the guy that made sure that I got the Egyptians to open the border to let goods through, medicine and food. But what's happening is, and I'm the guy that's been able to pull together the Arab states to agree to help the Palestinians with food and shelter. I'm the guy, and so it's not. I mean, I've been very supportive of the Palestinians. But Hamas are a bunch of thugs.
So Palestinians should be grateful for Joe Biden. He's in Detroit. He's trying to appeal to Arab Americans because there's this great exodus of Arab Americans from him and the Democratic Party because of his support for the Gaza genocide. And his statement is they should just be grateful for him. He's done more for them than anybody.
Hamas is not worthy to. I was over there about 8 days after the massacre. Saw photographs of mothers and daughters being tied in a rope together, kerosene pouring on their head, and them burned to death. Nothing's happened like that since the Holocaust.
And he just lies he lies and made up photos. Remember, he lied and said he saw photos of beheaded babies. He just made it up again.
That's at least the third time he's lied about seeing photographs. But someone who can lie about that can also actually say that they've done more for Palestinians than anybody, when he's done more than anybody to massacre Palestinians. So many that we don't even know how many have been killed. There was that Lancet letter recently saying that the toll is over 180,000. I mean, who knows? We don't even care because that's how expendable Palestinian lives are to Joe Biden. That's one of the most demented racist things that's ever been said. Bragging about how much you've done for people whose mass murder you facilitated. It's crazy. And then you look at people and then look at the media response to that. Did that cause a controversy? Did anybody Democratic Party leaders call on Biden to step down because of that? No, they just don't like him because he's demented and he doesn't have his chance of beating Trump. But when he says outright racist, insane things like that, they don't care. And still, and we should talk about this a little bit, somehow the most stalwart defenders of Biden right now are the progressives. Ilhan Omar called him the best president of my lifetime. We have his back. That's what she said. Bernie Sanders has been going around making the case for Biden. Like, why are the progressives of all people trying to rescue Biden's sinking ship? Especially when there's no. I mean, if they can turn to us and say, "Look, this is what we've gotten for it. We've gotten Biden to promise this," but what can they actually say that they've gotten? Like he announced, he announced that they're going to cap rent increases at 5%. Okay, like. That's something. Look, it's better than nothing. But is this really who you want to stake your political reputation on right now? Someone who's claiming he's done more for Palestinians than anybody when he's the one responsible more than anybody else for their mass murder.
It's obvious horse trading. Bernie has gotten Biden to declare that he opposes corporate greed. It's part of Biden's talking points now. He's increasingly using anti-elite, anti-Wall Street talking points in order to guarantee support from Bernie and the squad. AOC, you remember, she led him to the lectern by her hand in order to announce a giant investment in Green New Deal, Green New Job Corps, something like that. So they're just basically extracting all they can, like a con artist with a senior citizen who's willing to give up their credit card details. It's sad because he's not going to last to November, it seems. And the saddest part is These are people who've accused him of genocide. Bernie has accused him of sponsoring war crimes. AOC has accused him of sponsoring genocide. Ilhan Omar has accused him of sponsoring genocide. It's like, so it's like, you are Hitler, but give me Green America Corps and it's all good. We can hold hands. So that tells you all you need to know about them. And I guess there's this just really not disturbing, but stupid statement by someone from the uncommitted movement. I don't know if it's a movement anymore, if they're going to do this, about Kamala, about the possibility of Kamala. There are all these different forces lobbying for Kamala. I will say it's not gone unnoticed that Kamala Harris has been more empathetic towards Palestinians than Biden, said Natalia Latif, a spokesperson for the uncommitted movement. What's the uncommitted movement? It's vote uncommitted in the Democratic presidential primaries to protest Biden's support for Israel's genocide of the people of Gaza. Great cause, completely idiotic statement to make when Kamala Harris is there any evidence to support that statement?
In my exchange with the person who tweeted that, who's with Justice Democrats, he pointed to an article in which Kamala Harris wanted to give a speech that expressed some sympathy toward Palestinians, but it got edited. But if you look at the actual changes they made, there really wasn't a very big difference. And ultimately, Kamala Harris says in the article, I stand with the president. We're in total lockstep when it comes to Israel and Palestine. So I just don't see any evidence at all that Kamala is more empathetic. And again, she recently hosted a screening at the White House, laundering the Hamas sexual violence scam, showing that documentary made by Sheryl Sandberg, which is a complete fraud. So the fact, look, if they were to say anybody would be better than Biden, it can't get worse than Biden, fine. Like, I could accept that as an argument because it can't get worse than Biden.
It can get worse.
Well, in terms of on the Democratic side, unfettered support for Israel, I don't think Kamala would be worse than Biden. I don't know, but at least I think you could plausibly make the argument that she wouldn't be worse. So if you want to make that argument, okay. But to say that she's shown empathy toward Palestinians, or more so than Biden, when there's no evidence of that at all, that to me was disappointing.
Well, if you are going to be uncommitted, don't commit to a candidate if they haven't given you a commitment to support a ceasefire. Kamala has made no commitment to a ceasefire, to ending the bombs. And I think there should be a commitment to ending the special relationship with apartheid Israel, period. And you don't just give up your support to someone because of how you feel. That shows a complete lack of political tact. Power cedes nothing without a demand, as Frederick Douglass said. And there's no demand there. They're just like, we think you might be okay. And by the way, we're going to just completely ignore that your husband is doing all these Israel lobby events.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Ella Emhoff, the daughter of Douglas Emhoff's daughter-in-law of Kamala, initially said some statements opposing or called for donations to humanitarian relief in Gaza and has since been silenced. So it's pretty clear. And look at Kamala's meetings with Netanyahu behind the scenes at AIPAC, her speech at the American Jewish Committee. She's been an Israel lobby tool her entire time in the Senate. So these forces that exist around the Democratic Party, Waleed Shahid, you mentioned before, who's I think advising the Justice Democrats and the uncommitted movement. He was on Bernie's staff.
Yeah, and
I don't trust any of them. They have this proximity to the Democrats.
I thought uncommitted was a good idea. I appreciate what they did, and but I agree with you that why give Kamala any sort of credence or credit when she's offered you nothing so far? All she offered was a pretend call for a ceasefire. Remember, she gave that speech in Selma where she says, "We need a ceasefire," and then everyone broke into applause. And after it died down, she said, "For at least 6 weeks." So basically, she was just reiterating the U.S. government line, which is that there should be a 6-week pause to the massacre. So that's what Kamala's done. So there's no reason to give her any credit before she's actually giving you something concrete. I think that's really important to remind these people of.
Yeah, they're completely screwed. We got a few more topics to get out of the way that I think are really important to do this week. Do you want to do Max Boot and Sue Me?
Yeah, well, this is funny. So Max Boot, neocon chicken hawk, who's spent a career accusing everybody who doesn't support proxy wars, dirty wars, and invasions of being foreign assets. His wife, who's a former analyst of the CIA, had just been accused of being an agent for South Korea and trying to influence Americans in exchange for payments from South Korea and some really nice luxury handbags and fancy dinners. And amazingly enough, not only is she Max Boot's wife, but they've co-authored a number of articles together advancing the South Korean government line. So Max Boot appears to himself be caught up in his wife's alleged espionage activities, which is just it's you know, all these accusations are always a confession, and it looks like Max Boot is no exception.
So yeah, I couldn't. He's blocked me, and I didn't feel like searching, but I feel like he's called me or you like useful idiots or Russian assets or something. Max Boot is one of the biggest warmongers in the think tank world to have achieved sort of some level of national renown through punditry. He was a signer of I think the original Project for a New American Century document calling for the U.S. to be a benevolent hegemon. He spent much of his career at the, the Kimberly Kagan think tank. And maybe I'm developing some level of dementia. The Institute for the Study of War.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is funded by the implementers of the profiteering from war. The arms industry is a major sponsor of the ISW, and they were simultaneously serving as David Petraeus's advisors while they lobbied for a surge, which also benefited the arms industry. They do that kind of thing. Max Boot's basically been a war lobbyist, but an American war lobbyist who's never met a war he didn't like. Then during the Trump era, Max Boot engaged in some kind of rebrand. And I think this is around the time when he met Sue Me and left his first wife. And he started wearing a top hat that made him look like some kind of neocon train conductor and kind of trying to dress sharp and writing articles about his white privilege for foreign policy. Why is Max Boot interested in white privilege? He was rebranding himself to bring militarism and neoconservatism back to its home in the Democratic Party at a time when Black Lives Matter was out in the streets. And all along, he was getting involved with an apparent ROK South Korea lobbyist who was doing what I think everybody in the think tank world that Max Boot operates in does, right? She was getting money from some foreign government, like all the think tanks. Basically, she just cut out the middleman. Like if you're at the Atlantic Council, which has recently smeared us, you're getting money from the United Arab Emirates or some other Gulf state, or the US government or NATO directly funds the Atlantic Council. And then you're getting a fellowship, but you're getting the fellowship through the Atlantic Council. So you're just working for them. But she was just getting it from the ROK and then going out and publishing pieces with Max Boot calling for policies that are friendly to South Korea, sending them tactical nukes, stuff like that. So this was sort of the legal, she took it to the next level of the legal bribery that prevails among Beltway lanyards, the same people who constantly call us Russian or Iranian or Chinese assets. She called Max Boot, ironically called Tucker Carlson a useful idiot of Vladimir Putin, who sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines. Russia is the most likely culprit, Max Boot says, which may be why Putin's useful idiots like Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump are blaming America. I don't even think that anyone believes Russia is the most likely culprit. now, and Russia was never the most likely culprit.
I mean, he has a whole history of just complete failure. It's amazing. It's an amazing window into just how the U.S. established media rewards failure, because he's been wrong about everything, including anything to do with Russia. He obviously was a huge Russiagator, but here he is. This is 6 years ago this month, actually, July 2018. He debated the late Stephen F. Cohen, who Max and I knew well, on CNN about Russiagate. And because Stephen F. Cohen dared to question the foundations of Russiagate, Max Boot, of course, smeared him as a Russia apologist.
Threatens Russia, and that's why a lot of intelligence officials think that there is something highly suspect in the relationship between Putin and Trump.
I have no idea what Mr. Buddha is talking about. He wants Trump to threaten Russia. Why would we threaten Russia? You've got two nuclear
because they're attacking us. Russia is attacking us. Russia is attacking us right now, according to Trump's own director of national intelligence.
Russia.
Listen to how just like the quiver in his voice, like he's so choked up because Russia at the time was accused of stealing some emails and putting out dumb social media memes, and he's such a unhinged neocon that in his brain that means Russia. Even if, I mean, it wasn't even true, of course, but even if it were true, he's saying that Russia is attacking us, and therefore he wants a confrontation with Russia.
Yeah, he seems wounded to his core that anyone would question the idea of war with Russia.
I've been studying Russia for 45 years. I've lived in Russia and I've lived here.
And you've been consistently an apologist for Russia in those 45 years.
Russia hasn't. Excuse me, what did you say to me?
I said you've been consistently an apologist for Russia in those last 45 years.
All right, I don't do defamation of people. I do serious analysis of serious national security problems. When people like you call people like me, and not only me, but people more eminent than me, apologists for Russia because we don't agree with your analysis, you are criminalizing diplomacy and détente, and you are the threat to American national security in the story. Why do you have to defame somebody you don't agree with it? They used to do that in the old Soviet Union. We don't do that here. Well, we used to, but we need to stop it.
So, I mean, Professor Cohen was right in more ways than one because he called them a threat to national security. Well, it turns out U.S. law enforcement agrees because they've just indicted his wife as being a threat to national security by serving a foreign power. So there's some karmic justice there in Max Boot smearing Stephen F. Cohen as a Russia apologist, when meanwhile, now he's caught up in an actual foreign plot. And it will be interesting to see how the Washington Post handles all of this. Last time I checked, they hadn't updated the articles that he co-wrote with his wife about South Korea. But I'm sure, I mean, they're going to have to because it's such a scandal.
We'll see. I don't believe they'll do anything ethical. By the way, Max Boot was born in Russia, which I think has something to do with his hatred of Russia. He's one of those exiled neocons. But the Washington Post, as Alex Rubinstein pointed out, had the Qatar Foundation ghostwriting op-eds for Jamal Khashoggi. And I don't know if there's been any accountability there for that. Meanwhile, the Washington Post is trying to falsely brand us as foreign agents on the basis of a nothing burger.
Yeah, Joseph Menn of the Washington Post, if you're watching this, he's the one who wrote the article attacking Wyatt Reed of the Grayzone and smearing us as being falsely claiming we're paid by Russia and Iran. If he's watching this, he can now report on his own colleague at the Washington Post for being an actual foreign agent or a foreign agent adjacent. He can follow that beat.
Well, I mean, that's just what it is Max Boot and his wife, or Max Boot's wife, was advancing the interests of a supposed ally of the U.S., which is basically a frontline state in the containment policy against China and North Korea. We are, like Stephen Cohen, advocates for peace with Russia and China and Iran. So we get called assets of Russia and we get attacked in the Washington Post, and they try to hold us accountable because we are a threat to the paycheck of people like Gene Kirkpatrick fellow Max Boot. And that's just the way that the Beltway foreign policy elite and the think tank lanyard world works. If you're for peace, you're a subject for an article of the digital threats editor of the Washington Post. You are a digital threat if you're for peace.
Here's one more from Max Boot. 18 reasons why Trump may be a Russian agent.
I missed that.
And of course, he went on CNN to explain. I mean, the karma is just so funny.
Let me see. Pulling troops from Syria. Well, that's clearly why. If you're for peace, if you pull the troops out, you're a Russian asset.
Yes. Putin got Trump to call for pulling troops from Syria. Well, thankfully, from Max Booth's perspective, Trump's generals just ignored him. And so therefore undermined that Russian plot to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria.
Number 12 supports populists. Well, I guess William Jennings Bryan was also, in the back pocket of the Romanovs. What do we got? Undermines the FBI. I remember that one. If you criticize the FBI, you're a Russian asset. That's what they did. Oh man. It's really taken me back. Well, I don't know if he's issued any statement about this at all.
I'm blocked as well by him, so it's hard to keep up, but hopefully we'll hear from him soon.
Yeah. So Donald Trump, at about the precise time, like almost at the exact same time that Donald Trump was calling for an Iron Dome over the United States of America, Yemen's Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, was flying a suicide drone 2,500 kilometers from Yemen over the Red Sea, over Egypt, over the Mediterranean, toward Tel Aviv, and penetrating the Iron Dome system that the United States taxpayers funded to the tune of several $1 billion. Here's footage. And this was clearly targeting, as you can see from this footage, the U.S. consulate, formerly the embassy, on Tel Aviv's Hayarkon. There's the hit, which killed 1 person and wounded 7. Major embarrassment for Israel, major military success for Yemen's Ansar Allah, de facto government, in its responsibility to protect operation around Gaza to attempt to force a ceasefire. And, I pointed this out here. I think there are 2 key points to make here. And one, let's watch what Trump was saying at almost that precise time first.
But now we have unbelievable technology. And why should other countries have this and we don't? No, we're going to build an Iron Dome over our country, and we're going to be sure that nothing can come and harm our people. So
he's calling for an Iron Dome. And this was actually an initiative of the Trump administration when Trump was in office. But it had to be scrapped. Why? Because Donald Trump wouldn't take on Israel. He wouldn't put America first. This is March 2020. U.S. Army scraps $1 billion Iron Dome project after Israel refuses to provide key codes. They refuse to provide the source codes. And so the American military abandoned plans to buy 2 more Israeli missile defense batteries and integrate system into existing air defenses due to cyber vulnerabilities and other problems. So basically, if you're an American taxpayer watching this right now, you paid for this system. You paid the Israeli military industry, specifically the Rafael company, billions of dollars to develop this system. Then you paid billions to implement it. And then Israel refused to let you have the source codes that you basically paid to generate. And then Congress voted to give Israel more money, including AOC, who voted present, wouldn't even vote against funding the Iron Dome system. And Donald Trump's calling for a new one, but he had the chance before. He just wouldn't hold Netanyahu and Israel accountable. So that's, I think, one of the first points to make here, along with the fact that Yemen is going up against the entire West and its top attack dog in the Middle East and scoring some serious hits.
It's incredible that Yemen's doing that, given the position that it's in. It's one of the poorest countries in the Middle East. They're already under extreme pressure. They've been subjected to years of terror from the Saudi bombardment backed by the U.S., and they're punching back directly against Israel. It's pretty extraordinary. I don't know what does Trump explain what an Iron Dome in the U.S. would protect the U.S. from? Like, who is he expecting is going to be launching drones or missiles at the U.S.? Like, is going to come from Canada or Mexico? I don't know. So I'm not actually. I mean, it's funny that Israel wouldn't even hand over the codes, but ultimately, I'm not mourning the loss of an Iron Dome system inside the U.S. because it just seems so ridiculous. But that's Trump's version of America first, I guess. Like, let's also build a useless weapon system here, not just in Israel.
Maybe it's because Patriots are so hard to deploy and they failed against some pretty elderly ballistic missiles fired by the Houthis at Saudi Arabia's oil fields a few years ago. So I don't know what it is. It's all rhetoric from Trump. It's just kind of ironic. And the success of this long-range suicide drone in hitting Tel Aviv, it's so rare to see Tel Aviv get hit. Sometimes there are some rocket hits from Gaza that don't do much damage. It really shakes Israel to the core, because if you have to understand the function of Tel Aviv in Israeli society and in the Israeli psyche. Israel's a very small country, very densely populated, one of the more densely populated places on earth. And the Jewish population feels under siege psychologically. If they go east, they're going to the settlements, which are themselves little forts, fortified colonies. It's not a place that soldiers want to go to blow off steam. So they go to Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is facing west. It's facing Europe. It's the party town. It's the place where you feel like you're not actually in the occupation, the conflict, the situation. And if that veil, that very thin veil of psychological security is penetrated, then Israel starts to come apart psychologically. That's why there is so much fear and terror over Saddam Hussein launching a few Scud missiles at Tel Aviv. Actually, the only casualty they caused was when a guy panicked and put on his gas mask and asphyxiated himself. So you can see the panic in the videos after the drone hits. There have been some sort of like mocking evacuation orders being issued for Tel Aviv. And the fact is that as soon as Tel Aviv feels a scintilla of what Gaza feels, when they start feeling it on a regular basis, you're going to see a lot more pressure for a ceasefire. And if it comes from Ansar Allah, then the responsibility to protect operation will have succeeded. And it raises another important contradiction about Israeli society and Israeli propaganda, which is that Tel Aviv is filled with human shields. Everybody in Tel Aviv is a human shield because Israel places its Hakiria defense ministry right in the middle of North Tel Aviv, along with countless other military sites, while requiring that its entire population from age 18 to 35 participate in military service, and they're often walking around wearing uniforms. Haaretz even asked, does the presence of the IDF's headquarters in Tel Aviv endanger the city's population? Well, I think the presence of the American consulate also endangers the civilian population because the US is a party to genocide in Gaza. So now the tables are beginning to turn. The Iron Dome system is not going to work. And I think Iran and Hezbollah have their own means of penetrating the Iron Dome system in Israel's defenses. So this is moving the ball closer to a ceasefire. Anything you want to add, Aaron?
Well, I mean, should we talk about just some of the news coming out of Gaza? The health ministry discovering polio, and the ICJ, meanwhile, the International Court of Justice handing down a really important ruling today, reaffirming that basically Israel's occupation of the occupied territories, including Gaza, is illegal and that Israel owes compensation to Palestinians for stealing their land. And they include Gaza in this, despite Israeli claims that Gaza is not occupied. The ICJ reaffirmed that, in fact, it is, that Israel is still the occupying power. And as the occupying power, it's presiding over the reintroduction of polio to the Gaza Strip, which is being found in the sewage water.
Yeah, I mean, let's first, Craig Mokhiber, who is the former head of the New York office of the UN Human Rights Council, had this to say about the World Court decision. The World Court has just rejected all Israeli, US, and Western objections, ruled that the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is entirely unlawful and declares Israel's committing racial segregation and apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories. Importantly, they ruled that the Oslo agreements do not and cannot trump the obligations of international law, which protect the rights of the Palestinian people, and it rules that Israel must evacuate all settlers, dismantle settlements and the wall, and allow all Palestinians who are forced out to return. So the right of return, which is enshrined in UN Resolution 194, is affirmed by this decision. This is obviously a legal nightmare for Israel. And if you look at the statements of Netanyahu and his ministers, they're not responding with international law. They're not responding to this with any legal argument. They're simply responding to it by banging the Bible and invoking the Holocaust, which they're currently reenacting in Gaza, and it's not going to work anymore. Unfortunately, these decisions have no possible enforcement mechanism. So,
yeah, but they do underscore that all the people who claim to care about the rules-based international order and human rights are all just complete frauds. And you've seen already today, to the extent there's been commentary about the ICJ ruling, all the Israel supporters in Congress like Debbie Wasserman Schultz having a complete meltdown, because it underscores that they're on the side of, the worst rogue state in the world, Israel, and everything it's doing. So legally, practically means nothing, but morally, rhetorically, there is some significance there, and it does give Palestinians more rhetorical ammo to press their case. And all these claims from Israeli propagandists that Gaza is not under Israeli control, it's completely dismantled by rulings like this.
And we're expecting possibly in the next 2 weeks the ICC indictment of Netanyahu, who will be in Washington on July 24th. If you're anywhere near Washington, it's very important to be there because the Gaza genocide continues. We'll talk about some of the latest horrors that have been produced there by Israel. It continues, but it's now in many ways drowned out as the US campaign kicks into high gear, drowned out by the injury to Donald Trump's ear and the assassination attempt, by Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off at the RNC just moments before Reverend Franklin Graham appears on stage. It's going to be drowned out by all the news about Biden dropping out. So it's important to maintain the momentum and force the issue. And that means that Netanyahu, there's no way he should be allowed to enter the US Capitol quietly. It's shocking that he's been allowed to be there. And it's shocking that the Democratic Party leadership, just from a purely cynical point of view, is allowing him to be there when he's basically campaigning for Donald Trump. So
House Speaker Mike Johnson even talked about having Congress members arrested if they protest Netanyahu.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how on board the Republicans are with Netanyahu. I mean, America first, except for Israel, obviously.
I'll be there. I think Aaron's going to be there. Watch my Twitter account. I'll announce a protest I'll be probably speaking at, which I think will be really unique outside the US Capitol. This is July 24th. This is what Israel's doing in Gaza by design. The Gaza Health Ministry, evidence of polio found in sewage samples in Gaza. This is a disease or virus that's been eradicated almost everywhere on the planet. Doesn't exist in North America, but evidence of polio was found in sewage samples in the Gaza Strip. The samples results correspond to the findings of the World Health Organization in Egypt, which were tested in an Israeli laboratory approved by the organization. Kind of strange that the WHO is collaborating with Israel, given that it's engaged in genocide. And I pointed out on Twitter that retired Israeli General Giora Eiland, who's a fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies in Tel Aviv, said that after all, severe epidemics in the southern Gaza Strip will bring victory closer and reduce fatalities among IDF soldiers. He said that, he wrote that in an op-ed proposing a more bold path to victory in Gaza in late 2023. So this is all kind of by design. And besides polio, there are many infectious diseases spreading across the Gaza Strip, particularly skin diseases, because soap is not available. People are sleeping in tents. They're festering in the heat. It's very difficult to take showers. It's very difficult to wash your clothes. This is all part of the equation of genocide, attacking a civilian population, because according to the doctrine, this is a video illustrating the crisis. So we're seeing the kind of conditions people live in Gaza, where they're living within sewage. The sewage systems have been bombed by Israel. They were bombed in 2014. They were bombed in 2018. They were bombed in 2021. That means it's not only difficult to dispose of sewage, as I saw when I was, she's saying the rash affected my son's life. The rash is spreading across his legs and he can no longer walk because of the pain. The water's polluted and salty, and the waste accumulated next. The refugee camps led to the spread of many diseases. I noticed a rash appearing on my son. He developed a fever and is always itchy, so he cannot sleep. The water's not clean, and we don't have personal hygiene items, including shampoo and soap. There's no clean water to bathe with. I'm itching all the time and I can't sleep at night. The children refuse to play with me. So this is another aspect of the genocide, and it's something I witnessed during a period of peace, or quote unquote peace with Gaza under siege, where, you know, if you go into an ordinary person's house and open up the tap to take a shower, you're going to get brackish water pouring out, like seawater. People often like use bottled water just to get clean in Gaza because the sewage systems are so depleted by siege and warfare. But now it's just the situation is untenable for so many people, and we're learning that polio is present. Israeli soldiers are supposedly going to have to get boosted on their polio vaccinations. And where's Bill Gates? Where's the Gates Foundation? Where's Melinda Gates? Where's the leadership of the World Health Organization? Where is everyone who wanted to shut down the entire planet over COVID, over this man-made crisis? We're hearing their response is muted at best. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
No, it's just
yeah.
That quote from that retired Israeli general says it all. I mean, this is by design. Israel knew exactly what would happen if they blocked aid, blocked medicine, blocked water, blocked soap, bombed the sewage system, bombed everything to bits. They knew exactly what would happen, and they're getting the result, which includes polio in the sewage water. It's just beyond comprehension.
You want to close with CrowdStrike?
Sure. Yeah. Well, people might have noticed today that there was a huge disruption of air travel. A lot of planes were grounded because of a serious disruption of a computer network, and the culprit turns out to be CrowdStrike, which is a cybersecurity firm, And if you watch the Grayzone, you'll recognize the name because CrowdStrike basically kicked off Russiagate 8 years ago in 2016, around this time when they accused Russia of hacking the DNC. And that allegation, CrowdStrike coming forward to say that, is what set off the entire Russiagate affair, which had so many consequences, not just for the US, but the planet. And CrowdStrike was working for the Clinton campaign. And they were working for the Clinton campaign at the same time as the Clinton campaign was framing Trump as a Russian asset, which naturally raised the question, was CrowdStrike also framing Russia as the culprit of stealing Democratic Party emails on behalf of the Clinton campaign? But yet, despite all its weird connections and its lack of evidence, the FBI relied on CrowdStrike rather than conduct its own investigation of the DNC servers. And then we found out years later that CrowdStrike had concealed evidence that actually they had no evidence of alleged Russian hacking. And so it's just amazing now that CrowdStrike, after being caught up in the scandal, rather than suffering from it, they've appeared to have really profited, because now they're a massive company. You see ads for them everywhere. And they're so powerful, so influential that their mistakes have the capacity to like ground flights around the world and disrupt banking and all these other things. So it's just a weird new twist in the saga of CrowdStrike, and yet another product of Russiagate, that all-consuming scandal known as Russiagate, which just it continues to impact our lives. And you know, we're one of the few people to call out CrowdStrike for the weird role and troubling role that it played, and to look at the actual evidence that was never there for the alleged Russian hacking claims. And I don't understand how CrowdStrike can go from being a cybersecurity firm, getting it so wrong, or at least so suspicious, being so suspiciously involved in the whole Russiagate thing, to now being so powerful that it can crash global financial systems and even air control systems. It's very strange.
Here's a report on CrowdStrike's latest.
Hi, Tom Connell here. We've got a huge unfolding story in Australia and right around the world, but we can't bring it to you in the normal way. Why? It's affecting us at Sky News, at Foxtel, many customers, many users, many businesses. What's happened is we believe a malware company called CrowdStrike has essentially gone down. If we have a look at our studio here, this is what it looks like on many computers right around the world. Now, technical operators call this the BSOD, the BSOD, the blue screen of death. People are loading, systems are crashing, they're loading again and again and again. It's on a loop. So many companies are unable to work right now, including Sky News. Now, it's affecting users in Australia. We're talking major banks, telcos, media companies, Sky News, obviously. ABC Radio was completely down last time we saw it as well. But it's right around the world. This is an international company. We can see here what it's doing as well to our screens. We've seen users in the US, in Europe, in Asia, New Zealand, right around the world this is happening. So this will be a massive story. There are offices everywhere that have just gone completely down, people unable to work. There'll be payment systems not working, and all sorts of issues, including for telcos. Remember that last outage for Optus and all the issues caused there? So this is massive. As I said, we believe the company is CrowdStrike. That's the belief at the moment. The last contact we had, by the way, with the minister's office was that the belief was it was going to be CrowdStrike involved and they were working to fix their systems, but it's up to them to do it. So the stress on that is it's not a hack, if you like, where the government has to try to ward it off. It's a systems issue within CrowdStrike.
So, yeah, CrowdStrike has been given a little bit too much influence over information technology. They helped take us to war. They helped pave the path to war with Russia, and now they've created one of the biggest IT failures in recent times. And didn't Sean Henry, who is the president of CrowdStrike, testify before Congress under oath that he had no concrete evidence that the server of the DNC had been hacked by Russia?
Correct. So CrowdStrike goes public in June 2016, says Russia hacked the DNC. Democrats who are paying CrowdStrike and managing its activities seize on that and basically blame Russia for the leak of Democratic Party emails put up by WikiLeaks that same summer. And then afterwards, Sean Henry, who's the head of CrowdStrike, when he comes before Congress under oath, he admits they actually had no evidence. And the public, rather than being told that at the time, only learns about that in May 2020. So throughout the entirety of the Mueller probe, and remember, that was all consuming. Russiagate was the top story. The public was forbidden from learning that CrowdStrike, which triggered this entire Russiagate thing, had no evidence for the foundational allegation that set it off. And so it's extraordinary. And meanwhile, what else was happening, by the way? Nancy Pelosi, who's known for her stock purchases, like for making a lot of money off of stocks, even though she's one of the most powerful people in the country politically, she invested in CrowdStrike. Her and her husband invested in CrowdStrike. So they profited off of CrowdStrike, not just politically and using it to push their Trump-Russia scam, but even financially too. So they'll be fine from CrowdStrike's mistakes and sloppiness, including today's, but the rest of the world certainly is not.
They never even had the server, the DNC server, and the FBI never demanded the server. And that's how I knew that they weren't going to ever be able to produce concrete evidence, because CrowdStrike never had the server.
I mean, it just
the DNC destroyed the server, right?
I don't remember if they destroyed the server or not.
They never gave it up.
They never gave it up because, and I've written about this, they even misled Congress about their attempts to get the server. So Sean Henry and Michael Sussman was the lawyer working for Clinton who oversaw CrowdStrike. They testified that the FBI never asked for access to the server. It's not true, they did, but CrowdStrike and the Clinton campaign stonewalled them. And the FBI, rather than saying, give us the server, they backed down. So just as the FBI relied on the Clinton-funded Steele dossier to chase their fictitious, Trump-Russia conspiracy, they also relied on Clinton-funded CrowdStrike to investigate or not investigate the DNC server. They just took CrowdStrike's word for what they found. So it's a huge scandal. And we never got to the bottom of it because Republicans never really pushed this issue. The one time Trump did, he brought up the issue with Zelensky because he asserted that there was some Ukrainian tie to CrowdStrike. He got impeached. And in fact, actually, we only learned very recently, just as we only learned years after the fact that Sean Henry admitted they had no evidence of Russian hacking, we only learned very recently that the CIA, when it helped generate the Russian hacking claims, that they relied on Ukrainian intelligence operatives. And in reporting that I recently did, somebody close to Trump confirmed to me that that's what Trump was asking Zelensky about when he got impeached. So the one time Trump did try to bring it up, they impeached him. So they did not want this story to be exposed. It's a massive scandal, and we still don't know the full truth. We've done what we can to unearth what's publicly available, but there's still a lot more to learn, I think.
They don't want us to know. And why was the FBI so friendly to CrowdStrike? Well, Sean Henry, chief security officer, I mean, this might offer a clue.
Yeah.
He retired from the FBI, where he was a senior executive, and joined CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
He's basically, if it wasn't for the FBI, there would have been no CrowdStrike, or at least without his lead, there would have been no Sean Henry.
And who did he work closely with? He worked closely with James Comey and Robert Mueller when he was at the FBI. So they, in turn, were happy to rely on him rather than conduct their own investigation because they were totally in cahoots. They were totally colluding in the Trump-Russia scam. So it worked perfectly. And again, there's been no accountability for it. Even John Durham, look, it's a good example of how Washington works. Even John Durham, who was appointed to investigate the Russiagate scam, who had all the power in the world to uncover this, and who actually did unearth some pretty important revelations about how Sean Henry and Michael Sussman misled or even lied to Congress. John Durham didn't even touch this. He claimed this wasn't in his purview when it totally was. He just didn't have the guts to go there because he knew that if he asked those questions, he'd be asking the wrong. He'd be messing with the wrong people. So even John Durham was supposed to be this tough guy prosecutor who was going to find the truth about Russiagate. He ultimately backed down because there are just some scams in Washington you're not allowed to touch, and this one, Russiagate, was too big to fail.
And so they've cost companies and commuters, the airline industry, probably millions and millions of dollars today with this gigantic flub. Their messaging has been terrible. This shady firm, CrowdStrike, in addition to helping spawn Russiagate, which paved the path for war with Russia. But at the same time, it feels like it's profitable for them. Of course, CrowdStrike is part of the tech industry that's gotten contracts thanks to conflict with Russia through the military industry. But there's also this fear, or I don't know if it's a fear, but expectation and anticipation, not just within the national security state, but within the corporate elite, of a kind of cyber pandemic, like the viral pandemic of COVID that was anticipated in such eerily accurate fashion months before, or right as COVID was beginning to spread, by Event 201, the Johns Hopkins U Gates-sponsored simulation, which featured participation by current Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, as well as CDC directors and so on. There was a simulation a year later called Cyber Polygon at the World Economic Forum, which Whitney Webb has written a lot about it on Limited Hangout, that featured participation by CrowdStrike veterans. So I'm not saying that they have created a laboratory test run of a cyber pandemic. I can't prove that, but they're certainly studying it, and they're going to benefit from using this as a laboratory, even though they clearly created the problem and cost money and valuable time and inconvenience to so many people around the world. That's the way the sausage is made.
You know, the one time they've been held to account was when they claimed that Russia was responsible for some malware in some Ukrainian military equipment. So basically they accused Russia of hacking the Ukrainian military, and that was shown to be a lie. And so they had to withdraw that allegation. That was even before Russiagate. And amazingly, in Russiagate, they claimed to have identified the same Russian malware inside the DNC. So even though they had to retract that claim previously when they made it in Ukraine, they were allowed to make it when it comes to Russiagate. And they've only grown since then. Their rise is really, really strange. I've never understood. Like, all of a sudden, a few years after Russiagate, I started seeing CrowdStrike ads everywhere. They were on TV all the time, like online. It was, I was like, why is this company growing when they were involved in such a big scandal when it comes to Russiagate? And I don't know. One possibility is that they were rewarded for a job well done, in
I mean, where are their contracts coming from?
Yeah.
They got, and it's all about publicity too. So they got the necessary publicity. Well, that's all I got for this week. Anything you want to add?
No. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hope to see you on the streets of DC, July 24th. Protests against Netanyahu. Support the Grayzone at the links on the screen. And yeah, great stream, Max.
Oh, it's July 19th. So just sending my best to everyone in Nicaragua, celebrating the victory of Nicaragua's revolution, first over the dictator Anastasio Somoza, the US-backed dictator, and then again in July 2018, over the US global dictatorship. The Sandinista revolution continues to triumph. So just sending a special salute to everyone celebrating across Nicaragua, especially in Managua. I was there last year. Sorry I can't be there this year. Viva Sandino. Thank you all for supporting the Grayzone, for being a part of this. And we'll hopefully be announcing some new live events. And again, come to Washington on July 24th if you can. Protest Netanyahu's presence there. And Aaron and I will be there. So we hope to see you there. Like this stream, subscribe, all that other good stuff. Peace.
Peace.